This is objective 8b, proving congruent triangles. Our goal for today, I will be able to prove two triangles are congruent using the side angle side postulate. If two triangles have two sides that are congruent, and the angle between those congruent sides is also congruent, then the triangles are congruent. So I have two triangles here, and I see that they both have two sides congruent, and the angle between those two sides, or the angle formed by those two congruent sides, is also congruent in both triangles. Then I can tell that these two triangles are congruent, meaning all the other pieces, like this opposite side, is congruent, and these angles here must be congruent, etc. And this one up here is congruent to this one up here. I can tell that all those other things are congruent just by having the three pieces of information that two sides are congruent and the angle between them is congruent. Okay. Alright. So for our first example, I'm going to try and prove that triangle BIG is congruent to triangle DOG. Alright, so the first thing that I want to do is read the given information and draw my diagram. So given information, I have the diagram, and I also have that G is the midpoint of BO and ID. So once I have that information, I'm going to start thinking about what do I know and how do I know it. So if G is the midpoint of ID, so from here, I'm looking at that line, and I know that G is the midpoint. That means that these two pieces have to be the same length, because it's the same distance from I to G as it is from D to G. So I'm going to say that segment IG is congruent to segment GD because G is the midpoint, or the middle point, of segment ID. Okay, that's the first piece of information that I see and that I know. Now I'm going to look back and I'm going to see, is there anything else? Well, it says that G is also the midpoint of BO. So when I look at BO, that tells me that G divides BO evenly. It's the same distance from B to G as it is from O to G. So I can say that those two segments are congruent. So I'll say segment BG is congruent to segment OG. Because G is the midpoint of ID. Okay, so now I have two sides of each triangle that I know are congruent based on our given information. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and figure out, is this center angle the angle between the green marked side and the red marked side congruent in both triangles. And I can tell that those are congruent because they are vertical angles. So I can tell that angle BGI is congruent to angle DGO because they are vertical angles. So now I have that a side and then an angle and then a side are congruent in that order. So I can say, by the side angle side postulate, triangle BIG is congruent to triangle DOG by side angle side. And that's our first example of a triangle congruence proof.